Good evening, everybody. This is John Thompson. I am here tonight to present to you video 5 of my USS New York project. For those of you joining in, this is the Trumpeter 1/350th scale USS New York model. It comes with photo etch, and there are aftermarket photo etch products for this model, a much more extensive set. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to show you the model. As you can see, it's not quite done yet, but the difference in the video is in the detailing. I have finished detailing the forward tripod mast. Most of the superstructure elements are in. I put in all the 20mm guns, as well as all the elements on the tripod in the back. The gun turrets have been officially mounted. All her 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft guns are in place, as are the 5-inch guns on the deck out here on the top of the first deck of the superstructure. So I still have a little bit more work to do on her, mainly with the decaling. I'm going to do the cranes tomorrow and add the airplanes, so that will hopefully bring this model to a close. It was a joy to build. There were some things that were difficult on it, but in comparison to building the Texas, I used some different techniques. Among them, like I said, was painting the inside of the photo etch parts when they were on the fret before folding them, and that was a huge help with the catapult. It saved me a lot of stress in painting later. And I did the same thing with the cranes, which I'm going to build and put on the assembly tomorrow. So there will be one more video to follow in the series. Now, a couple other things I wanted to point out too. My technique for bending rounded photo etch parts, I like to use a drill bit, basically around to the approximate radius of the part where the curve has to go. I like it that way. It's actually, you get an even, firm surface to do that, and it helps you a lot in bending. It looks a lot neater because you're applying pressure on the same surface across a uniform firm surface, so it makes your bends look a lot neater and less sloppy. There were other things too that I did want to point out as well with working with the photo etch. You're gonna have issues sometimes with the super glue where you have the part on and it holds for a second or two and then boing, it pops out. I had that happen to me frequently with the model, so it was a nuisance and an annoyance to work with, doing the forecastle and adding the other details too as well. I still have to put on the railings yet on the main deck. Those have to go on, as well as doing the aircraft and the other details too that still have to go on. I still have to also rig it as well. The ship has been a challenge. Like I said, it's different than Texas in that the superstructure, believe it or not, was actually easier to build. And you can visibly see a different superstructure when looking at the Texas and the New York when you compare them side by side. And the reason for that is the Texas was actually a flagship. So when New York was modernized, she did not get converted into a flagship. So those are the main differences in appearance that are there. Um, I love the fact that there was not as much with the anti-aircraft guns, although I wound up with 2 extra splinter shields and 2 extra 20mm guns. Now, the nice part about this kit is because you have 5 or 6 sprues of the same part, and they're basically the gun turret pieces, the main gun pieces. It's really nice because you do have a generous amount of spare parts if you lose a gun barrel. Although with me, I did have to paint a part, and I had painted one ahead of time, but couldn't remember which sprue it was. So I wound up painting the same spare on the other sprue and using it. And what had happened was I found the part that was painted on the sprue, on another sprue after. So it does tend to happen a little bit when you build. Um, like I said, it's a great model. I'm gonna have to look into decaling it. I may wind up putting other decals on. I have to scrounge around and look and see what I have left in my my decal box. I'm not overly happy with the decals that come with this model. They're kind of crude, uh, but like I said, I'm going to probably have to do like I did with the Texas and sort of look around, see what I have to make this work. Other than that, the model went together pretty well. I didn't have the fouling issue with the gun turret that I had building the Texas. Now, the only other problem I would like to point out is if you want to mount the gun turret in the straight position, this is the one with the catapult on it. If you want to mount that in the straight position, meaning that the gun barrels are facing dead astern, you're going to have an issue with the railing that goes across the back of the catapult. That seemed to be an obstruction that was there. Now, I'm probably assuming on the real ship they probably removed those railings so you could get the gun turret to train. But when I didn't have the photo etch railings on, I had perfect clearance. Everything went around perfectly. I was able to train the gun from port to starboard. Uh, Basically perfectly. And I actually wound up having both the gun barrels and the gun turret pointing to both the port and starboard beams. So in that respect, that's something that you'll have to make a decision on. I glued all my gun turrets in place permanently. Unfortunately, the one thing that I'm not happy with Trumpeter is the fact that they don't provide a turret cap like, say, for instance, Revell did, where you could actually basically make the turrets swivel and the gun barrels elevate. This was essentially, they're basically held in place. You glue them into a hole, basically. You have a peg or a rounded flange that comes down from the bottom of the gun turret and goes into the hole. And that's basically it. That's all that really holds those gun turrets in place. So you do have to make a choice. Unfortunately, like I said, they're going to be permanently in that position. I decided to actually do something different. On the Texas, I had all my gun barrels on the main 14-inch guns. I had them all pointing forward except for the catapult. What I did here was I trained the stern 14-inch guns slightly, and I trained the forward two 14-inch gun turrets to starboard. So it does make for a unique and dramatic model. Again, I also want to point out I had to build this model a little out of sequence. So I did that in order to make painting the camouflage possible. I did it because there were areas either I couldn't get to, or it was just actually easier to paint the model than add the detail when I finished. This was true basically up in the tripods, where I had to build the tripods, paint it, and then I added the photo etch so I wouldn't get the splatters. And again, I painted the photo etch railings on the frets, which basically made for a much neater application, and I didn't have to worry about getting paint splatters all over my parts. So, especially when you have two colors, it's very frustrating. You work very hard to do that, and then you gotta do your touch-up work. And that kind of reduces also the chance of holidays too, as well. That was the other thing I tried to do. The 14-inch guns, I did that with. I did it with the little 5-inch guns as well, where I painted everything as sub-assemblies, and I did that because it was easier to do that at that point and then apply them to the model, so you lessen the chance of looking at the stock plastic color, which unfortunately, you can spend all this time making a great model, and you'll see holidays even after you photograph it, which can be a very frustrating thing. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to try to reduce them as much as possible. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have holidays. Even the best models do. And also keep in mind that the real ship probably had holidays too, as either they couldn't get to paint all the surfaces, or the surfaces, basically because the way the guns were elevated, they couldn't get to a specific spot, or perhaps maybe it was wear. Paint wore off these things. So a ship constantly needs to be painted. So that's something also to keep in mind. It is kind of an element of realism. If you want to, you can add rust on that if you prefer. I actually might wind up doing that, with mine just to bring out some of the detail. I know I'm going to probably add a little bit of rust on the anchors, but anyway, this is going to be my 5th video. There will be one more when I show the finished ship. So thank you very much for your time, and have a great evening.